One of the claims I made in the previous videos was that we're all value pluralists, in the sense that we all care about more than one kind of value. One of the effects of identifying with particular political tribes is that it becomes harder to recognize that plurality of values in ourselves and in other people. To help us think about this point, let's imagine a psychological value channel equalizer like the one we introduced in the first video. But this one only has 3 channels, corresponding to 3 different axes or dimensions of political value. Channel 1 is sensitive to values having to do with individual liberties and personal freedoms, and also to perceived threats to those freedoms. So if you're high on this channel, then you're paying attention to whether a particular policy or scenario promotes individual liberty or if it coercively restricts liberty. On this channel, individual liberty is good and coercion is bad. So you can think of it as operating along the liberty-coercion axis. Now, just to be clear, if you're low on this channel, it doesn't mean that you don't think liberty is good. It just means that it's not a consideration that plays a large or determining role in your moral psychology relative to other considerations. That's all. Now, moving down the line, we have channel 2. Channel 2 is sensitive to values having to do with oppression and liberation from oppression. If you're high on this channel, then you're paying attention to relations of structural domination and historic inequalities among social classes, which would include phenomena like sexism, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, economic exploitation, and so on. From this perspective, liberation from these structures of power and oppression is viewed as good. Oppression and domination within hierarchical structures of power is viewed as bad. So we can think of this value channel as operating along the liberation-oppression axis. Now, what about channel 3? Channel 3 is sensitive to values having to do with the distinction between civilization and, for lack of a better word, barbarism. It is about the need to preserve what is worthy about certain cultural or religious or political achievements. So if you're high on this channel, then you really care about maintaining the norms and the social order and stability that you perceive as a hard-won achievement of your culture. And you want to protect your community from threats to that order and stability. You want to defend it against ideas or groups that threaten to undo those achievements. So, along this civilization-barbarism axis, protecting the norms and institutions of civilized society is viewed as good. Disrupting or threatening those norms and institutions is viewed as bad. Now, I think it's obvious where I'm going with this. This 3-channel framework gives us a simple mental model for thinking about different political orientations. If you're high on channel 1 on the liberty-coercion axis, but lower on 2 and 3, then you likely identify as a libertarian. If you're high on channel 2 on the oppression-liberation axis, but lower on 1 and 3, you likely identify as a progressive liberal. And if you're high on channel 3 on the civilization-barbarism axis, but lower on 1 and 2, you likely identify as a conservative. These different political ideological orientations correlate with different psychological value profiles that peak in different places. Different intermediate combinations of these channels pick out different intermediate orientations within this space of possibilities. Now, this scheme isn't supposed to be exhaustive. There are political values that aren't represented on this list, but it does cover a lot of the ground that matters to people and that divides people.